The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chuy.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Laura Mackenzie. Nanaimo is a hub for arts and culture. This Friday, November 17th, the Nanaimo Art Gallery is hosting Making Waves, a community event to celebrate all things creative. This twice-yearly event highlights creatives from various areas of arts and culture in the city and gives attendees insight into the work they do. Featured in this event are 4 artists and creators that are making waves in their work. Sophia Seward Good, founder and designer of the fashion brand Ay Lelum. Chadwick, writer and journalist. Musician Micheal Clark, and visual artist Maynard Jr. Ahead of Making Waves, I was able to speak with coordinator Yvonne Vander Kooi about the event, as well as 2 of the speakers, Sophia Seward Good and Chadwick. I spoke with both of them about their creative process and how it comes out in their work. With that, let's jump into it. Hello Yvonne, welcome to Midcoast Morning. This Friday, the Nanaimo Art Gallery is hosting Making Waves. Can you tell me a little bit about the event?
Sure. Making Waves is a community event that we started probably even before the pandemic. We actually had, we ran a few of them prior to the pandemic, and it came about as a way to connect our community with people, local creatives in our community. And it's really kind of interesting, I think, for folks to hear from people who do creative work in the community, and maybe to help debunk or demystify what it is that they do on a daily basis. You know, obviously there's a lot of hard work involved. You know, sometimes I think we tend to romanticize what that world is all about. And I think, I think it's just really interesting to connect and find out a little bit what their life looks like on a daily basis.
How often does the Nanaimo Art Gallery host Making Waves?
We started doing it twice a year, and I think, maybe we'll do it more often. It's been really fun to connect local creatives and artists. We often meet first and talk about their practice, an interesting and informative and entertaining kind of component to share with the community. Their talks are kind of short. We call them lightning talks. So talk for about 15 minutes, and often they'll give me slides, images, perhaps some video links to play alongside their talk, so people can get a real kind of really quick, strong sense of what they do, not only by listening to them, but by sort of viewing some of the images that's connected to their work.
And what can people expect this Friday?
Well, I think a pretty exciting lineup, actually. I'm going to introduce, as I mentioned, four local creatives, from people, doing fashion to writing to music and painting. And the tickets can be bought ahead of time on our website on the Nanaimo Art Gallery, or at the door. There'll be a bar and snacks, so people can kind of mix and mingle when they first get there, and meet the artists, and then we'll sit down and have a fairly informal evening where we get to listen to what folks are up to in our community. And then afterwards, of course, we have a mix and mingle as well, where you can ask the artists questions and get to know them a little bit better. So it's a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Making Waves coordinator Yvonne Vander Kooi. Next, I had the chance to speak with designer and founder of the fashion brand Ay Lelum, Sophia Seward Good, about her creative process. Welcome to Midcoast Morning, Sophia. To get us started, can you give listeners some insight on what Ay Lelum is?
Sure. So Ay Lelum is a second-generation Coast Salish design house. We specify in making local and sustainable clothing, focusing on the revitalization of Halkominam art, which is the art style specific to the Nanaimo First Nations here in Nanaimo. The artwork on our clothing is usually our dad's, William William Good or our brother Joel Good. And then our mom is our mentor. Her name is Sandra Morehouse Good, and she helps us design a lot of the clothes. So we really work on kind of just that revitalization of our arts and our language by making music to coincide with our fashion shows and everything. So that's a little bit about Ay Lelum.
And so Making Waves is a glimpse into the lives of creative people and their work. To you, how does creativity and your work go together?
Well, I think if you look at the history of our people, especially here in Nanaimo, we have a lot of oral history and oral stories. So the creative force behind our designs and our clothing that we share with the public and making all of this wearable art for everybody to enjoy is really focusing more on the oral stories and the teachings and the history that goes along with it. And that's kind of where the creativity part comes in, is taking those oral histories, putting them into designs that can go on the garment so you can know a little bit about who we are and what the art reads.
Where does your creativity or inspiration come from?
Our creativity and inspiration really comes, I guess it would come from our father and all the legacy that our ancestors have left us. So it's really, we are definitely inspired by our histories and our past, but how can we move that forward in a modern way and make that shareable and known? So I believe that's really what inspires us, and also making sure that our children know who they are and that our children can read the art and understand the language and know their history and their stories is really important to us. And that's what inspires us to keep going.
How does it feel to share your work and then see it be worn by others?
I think sometimes I'm in a lot of shock when I see people wearing and our clothing and then they know who we are. It's definitely a different feeling, but I'm really excited that more people are coming to know our specific art form and are able to read a bit or be like, hey, that's an Ay Lelum item. And that's really wonderful to see, is when they actually recognize who we are and see the work and I think understand our language a little bit and listen to the music and know the stories. I think that's really beautiful.
Have you ever had a creative block? And if so, how did you work through it?
Oh, I think creative blocks happen all the time, especially it's not just myself that's doing all the creative work. We're a family of creatives. So sometimes it's not just a block. It can be a miscommunication between the family, which can be pretty hilarious, where there's 5 designers in one garment that needs to go out and we all have a different idea of what should happen on that garment. We usually just step back and take a break, go for a walk, and then come back to it. I think that's the most important thing you can do, especially when there's a blockage happening, is to take that moment of self-care and just step away for a moment and then come back to it.
And if you personally had a blockage, maybe you would lean to one of your family members to help you through it then?
I think, yes, I've definitely had many blockages, especially, when my sister and I started this clothing business, we couldn't sew. So even trying to explain to our mom what we wanted and how to do it, and we couldn't physically do it ourselves, you get a lot of blockages. So we definitely can talk to our mom or dad and say, or we might want this and our brother has a different idea. So there's definitely a great teamwork that happens so that we can all pick up where one has stopped or needed to take a break from.
And can you speak to your music and the creativity behind that?
Sure. I think making music is I think it's our favorite thing to do. Not only does it coincide with the oral stories that we've had for centuries, but I think on a larger level, my favorite quote from my dad is that we used to have a song and a dance for everything. So being able to make those songs for the clothing going down the runway, the clothing walking down the runway is kind of like the dance. So we're able to make music that coincides with the oral teaching that's coming out with that fashion collective. And then you're able to see the full picture. So I think the music is one of the best things that we can do, and revitalizing our language that is almost extinct. So that's really important that we keep focusing on the music and practicing our language so that the stories can come out back in their traditional languages.
And what piece would you say you were most proud of?
I don't think that I have a piece that I'm most proud of. I know with one of the hummingbird dresses, though, I actually sewed that one almost all on my own. So I was really proud of that one because my mom didn't have to help that much. So it really kind of amped up my confidence as to where I was as a sewer. I think my most significant piece that I made was the chiffon Eye of Life dress. I really enjoyed making that one. It had a lot of texture to it, as well as a lot of obstacles that I had to overcome. So I learned a lot making that one.
Is there a lot of room for creativity or to be learning while working on the pieces? Like how you said you were practicing or getting better at sewing and such.
Yes, I think there's a lot of room for growth and learning, especially in the sewing, because I've only been sewing for about 5 years now. I love to challenge my mom in many good ways and probably many ways that she would disagree with. But I'm always pushing her boundaries so that I can learn a little bit more at each fashion show.
Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking with me.
Thank you.
That was Sophia Seward Good of the fashion brand Ay Lelum.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHOI's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at choi.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Ahead of the event, Julie Chadwick came into the studio to speak with me about how she brings creativity into her journalism work. Can you start us off by telling us what you're currently doing for work in writing and journalism and how long you have been in that industry?
So my name is Julie, and I'm the lead reporter is the title we use at the Discourse Nanaimo. The Discourse, particularly this bureau in Nanaimo, has been going for about 3 years now. I'm going to say almost 3 years, a little over 3 years. And I've been involved in journalism off and on. I've taken time off here and there to have kids and stuff, but probably going on like 20 years now, which seems crazy, but yeah.
And before this, I spoke with coordinator of the event, Yvonne, and she was telling me about how making waves is for people to get a behind-the-scenes look at how people make their art. Can you explain to me why it's important to give people a behind-the-scenes look at your work as a journalist and writer?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about, it's like a 15-minute window that we have to talk about stuff. So I've been going over so many different ideas of what I most want to talk about. Because it's a little different. Like if it's a personal art practice, I think you have, like all of your particular creative motivations, I guess, behind what you're doing. And I think journalism's a little bit different because it's such a mix of different genres, I think, or almost like different ways that you use your brain, or and maybe even creativity is possibly frowned upon a little bit, although I definitely do utilize a lot of creativity in the stories that I do and the way that I do them, which we can get into. So in some ways, I feel a little bit like I don't want to talk so much about me in this this chat, because I don't think that I particularly am so interesting. What for me is interesting about what I do is the people that I talk to and stuff. I think journalism in a way has really made me fall in love with the community. And so, I think the creativity or something probably comes from the different ways in which I showcase the people and the relationships within our community.
But yeah, so going off of that, journalism at its core, more or less, is to explain to readers what's happening in a certain subject, answering like the 5 W's: who, what, where, what, when. More or less, that's not super creative in a way, but reading your work with the Discourse and other outlets you worked with, you do more than that. You make your work creative. Can you sort of speak to how you add your own creativity to grow and strengthen your pieces?
So I think I don't really think so much about things like the W's. I don't have a super formulaic way of writing, although I think there is formulaic aspects to journalism. I would probably say that my lack of formal training is probably one of my greatest strengths, because although I am really at this point kind of interested in going into journalism school, doing things kind of backwards, I am sort of interested in gaining certain skills out of that. But I think in not having gone to school, I didn't necessarily learn the exact way to do things, and that led to a bit of natural creativity, because I would just approach a story maybe it was just kind of like with a super curious mind. I'm just like a very intensely curious person. And so that's probably, personally, I think that it's a really natural state of being human. Yeah, I allow that to really lead the way when it comes to stuff. So, I mean, I could give some examples. When I was at the Nanaimo Daily News, for example, or even just with the Discourse, whatever, there's often like rote sort of stories that you do that are kind of the regular stories. And you can get in a bit of a rut, like doing stories in the same old way. And so mainly just to fend off the desire to not be bored, I would just try to find different ways to do a story. And a lot of the time, I think focusing on person that I'm talking to, or the person behind what's happening, or the motivation of a person to do something, or asking the question, like during an interview, I love asking the question of like, when was the moment that you realized you wanted to do this? Or like, let's say even, I don't know if she's still a politician, but Michelle Stilwell, who is like a Paralympian and became a politician. And it was sort of like hearing the whole backstory of what had happened to her to cause her to become paralyzed, which was an accident, and then asking her about at what point, like what is that point where you decide I'm not just going to kind of give into this, I'm going to actually like become an Olympic athlete, like a Paralympic athlete or whatever, you know. And people just come out with the most interesting stuff, you know, when you look at the journey of how they got somewhere. So yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer would be just having a super intense curiosity about everything.
What would you say? You get excited about one story, you think it's going to go great, and then it ends up being sort of drier and not as interesting as you thought. What do you do with that story?
I can't remember. Okay, this is one of the things. I can't remember if we talked about this last time we chatted, but a great example of that is every year, every summer, we used to do a like dog in the hot car story. And it's a really difficult, like summertime, there's not a ton going on. And it's a bit of a difficult story. First of all, to even make it a story, it's like, don't leave your dog in the car. That's kind of like the beginning and the end of it. Talk to Gary O'Brien at the RCMP and he's like, don't leave your dog in the car. And then what else do you do? So me and my coworker, Aaron, who's a photographer, decide to like lock ourselves in a hot car and film ourselves, which isn't the most original idea. Like I think I had seen it on YouTube or something, but yeah, and then writing it from like a first person point of view, which I think sounds more like activism than it actually is. Like I don't even know if that raised any awareness or anything, but it was just like, yeah, I try to find sort of an outside of the box way to tell it. And I feel like if you talk with someone long enough and really listen to what people are saying and try to take it in a certain direction, they almost always will come out with something interesting. And there is always like an aspect to the story that is pretty interesting.
So like even nowadays, when you're doing a story, you are always looking at it in a 360 point of view, or sort of looking at it in a way being like, there has to be a bit more maybe to this. So I need to be open to then dig a little deeper into it.
Yeah. And I think that sense really develops over time. Like I would say I'm only getting better at that maybe within the last... Probably mostly within my time at the Discourse, actually. So it's like you have often a bit of a sense of like, this is a story or this is not a story, or there's something here or there's not. But I would say, yeah, in the last 5 years or so, it's definitely gotten a lot better where I can quite easily. And I was talking with my friend and I guess sort of coworker over many years, Kara McKenna, who's one of the editors at Indigenews. And she was saying the same thing. We've probably been in journalism about the same amount of time, and we worked together at the Daily News and stuff. And she was saying that like we were sort of laughing about different stories where it's like, oh, that's clearly not a story. And then like, that's clearly is. Like, how could someone pass on that as a story? Like, that's just so obviously a good one. And yeah, I think that's definitely developed. Like one example of that would be, and it seems really obvious to me, but when I was doing the Buttertubs series about seniors housing and stuff. And this one thing that the seniors kept bringing up over and over was like, yeah, we used to have these wellness checks and we don't have them anymore. I probably heard it about 4 times and I was super busy on a different story and a different aspect of the story. And I just sort of like filed it in the back of my head. And then when that story was done, I said to Lauren, my editor, I'm like, there's something about this wellness checks thing. And what it was is I could tell that the way that they were talking about it, and this is maybe part of the creativity thing, is like really being aware of the subtext of conversations and the subtext of issues where someone might be saying something, but you're also listening to the way it's being said. And like you and I earlier were just talking about interviewing in person versus interviewing over the phone or whatever. And that's why in person is often just so much richer and better, because you're getting so much more information and body language and all the rest of it. And I could tell the way that they were talking about it was there was a lot of fear involved and a lot of like just the vibe around it was concerning. And I was like, there's a safety issue or something going on here. And that ended up being one of the stories that actually was like one of the most successful and won some awards and stuff. And you know, we did a bunch of freedom of information requests with the coroner about like different like deaths that had happened with seniors, and it really ended up being a much bigger thing. So yeah, like I'm not sure if that's like directly related to a creativity thing, but that definitely helps when like being more creative with story or in finding stories.
Would you say these last 5 years of you being able to look at stories in a different perspective or dig a bit deeper, would it be because you just been in the industry for 20 years now, you've learned, you've grown, or would it be because maybe the discourse has given you more space to be, again, maybe not creative, but able to flow a bit differently with stories?
That's a really good question. I think it's totally both. Yeah, it's definitely like experience. And some of the experience, like I think because the daily news experience is kind of brutal in that it's like, come on, like don't be a princess, give me your 500 words, like I don't care about your feelings kind of thing. And so in a way that was like a good little boot camp, which like caused me to be less precious about stuff and be like, even if I feel like something is really important, it sometimes is still not a story. Or sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't really want to do a story on this because it's going to like hurt someone's feelings, or it's going to be like, and I'm not making fun of, okay, maybe I'm making fun of it. But like, you know, I have to be able to put my feelings on a shelf sometimes. I don't know. It's really hard to explain. It's like, because part of having a good news sense is also like kind of being in tune with your feelings in a way, but it's like I have to be able to differentiate between like what I think or what I feel about something or what I care about or whatever, and then also what it's like it really is almost like this gut feeling. And definitely the discourse has given me a lot of freedom to pursue those things, like actual time, and like the amount of times that Lauren has been like, just, you know, well, like I trust you, I trust your instincts, like you just go for it kind of thing, which is super cool. Yeah, because basically like every story that I've done that's been really successful has totally just been like, like me phoning her up and being like, I don't know, like the one about the sub-metering thing that happened in a Nanaimo apartment building, which was a company that was doing sub-metering of electricity and of water. And yeah, it was just this guy that had contacted me and was like, there's this weird thing going on. And then he showed me some of his bills, and it was like, there's just something in my head that kind of clicked. And it especially clicked when I phoned a bunch of different government departments in the city of Nanaimo and different things. And this might have actually turned another reporter off of the story, but for me, it turned me onto it because none of them understood what I was talking about. So for perhaps myself, even as like slightly less experienced, I would have been like, oh, there's no story here. Like, this is just a big nothing, or nobody really even, like, I can't get anyone to talk about it. But for me, it really clicked because I was like, this is really weird, because this company is doing this thing, but nobody's regulating it. Like no one is. It's not even that someone's asleep at the wheel. It's that there isn't any wheel and nobody's driving at all. There's just like, this is just this thing happening. And there's not even any laws around it. And it was totally like alarm bell, like, oh, okay, something weird's happening. Yeah. So it was kind of both, I guess, in that example, my experience as a reporter helping me understand that was a story. And then also my editor being like, yep, go for it. If you think it's a story, go for it. So that's pretty cool.
Thank you so much for joining me on Midcoast Morning. That's all the questions I had for you today.
Awesome. It's always a pleasure. I hope I didn't ramble on too long.
That was our story for the day. Thank you to Yvonne Vander Kooi, Sophia Seward Good, and Julie Chadwick for joining me today. You can purchase tickets ahead of the event for $15 at NanaimoArtGallery.ca. I'm Laura Mackenzie, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHY's newsletter at chy.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can find more of their music on their Bandcamp. Support local artists by buying their music. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chy.ca.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHOY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chy.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.